Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, June 22nd. In our devotion for today, I want to continue with this whole idea of looking at peace and how do we achieve peace. And remember, peace is not the absence of conflict, the absence of dissonance, or the absence of uncomfortable feelings. Peace is equal to wholeness. We see this demonstrated in the Last Supper when Jesus is meeting with his disciples on the night before he is betrayed. And he gathers them together and he talks to them about the turmoil that is to come. And then in John chapter 16, he immediately, in that same conversation, transitioned to talking about peace. He tells them, you are going to be persecuted. Your life is going to be turned upside down. You are going to struggle. There's going to be tribulations and sufferings. There's going to be turmoil. But you're also, amidst all of that, going to have peace. We see there this Jewish Christian concept of peace that is all wrapped up in wholeness, not the absence of conflict. So we can ask the question, how do we achieve this peace? How do we achieve this wholeness? What do we have to do? And, to be honest with you, the whole Christian experience is about embracing and living new life and understanding the peace that God has given us. But there's a way that we can encounter and experience peace deeply in our life. There are things that we can do. Now, it's not a mathematical formula where you just do this, this, and this, and in 3 days you'll feel peace. It's not quite like that. But over a lifetime of adapting values and characteristics and lifestyles and incorporating them into our lives, we begin to feel this peace that Christ has given us. We get to experience it. It becomes more and more a part of who we are. It begins to transform who we are. It's part of that transformation process. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 6, the Apostle Paul speaks on this. And one of the things he says to incorporate or experience that peace, one of the steps that we can take is we can rejoice always. And you might want to say, okay, I've heard that before. We're supposed to rejoice in everything. Well, how is that we're supposed to do that? When we're experiencing turmoil, when we're experiencing hardship, what is it that we're supposed to do? How do we do that? Well, there's some further explanations about how we can rejoice. Specifically, how do we rejoice when we are suffering, when there is turmoil, when there's conflict, when there is deep sadness or dissonance in our life? And so I listed a couple of the things that Paul mentions in that book, in that letter to the church in Thessalonica, about how we rejoice always despite our circumstances. Here are some of the examples that Paul writes about. First, Paul says, we rejoice because our sufferings are only temporary. What we are going through now pales in comparison to what we are going to experience once we are in heaven. That's one of the reasons why we rejoice, because this is only a temporary turmoil that is in our lives. Second, we can rejoice because we never suffer in vain. God is not the source or the cause of our suffering or our turmoil or our conflict or dissonance. But what God says is, even though the world treats you this way, even though you experience the profound brokenness of the world, my promise to you is that it will not be in vain. I will take it to help mold and shape you, to help others experience grace and forgiveness. I will use these horrible moments and bring good out of them. We can rejoice at that. We can rejoice that no one, no matter what they do to us, can take the love of Christ from us. That is ours to keep forever and ever. No one can separate us from that love of Christ, no matter how bad things get. We can rejoice because Jesus suffered. And because Jesus suffered and ridiculed, that means I am going to probably at times in my life be suffered and ridiculed. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm being punished or rejected by God. We can rejoice because even though deep and profound connections and relationships might be broken in our lives, our connection to God and ultimately to God's greater community can never be severed. We can rejoice because of our ability to persevere, and we are able to persevere because we know Jesus has already won. The world has already been defeated, and even though it's striking back at us, ultimately God wins. And we can rejoice even though we're feeling the pain of the world biting back and swinging and taking its last shot at us before it goes down. We rejoice that we know that God has already been victorious. The end of the battle is not in doubt. And we can rejoice also because nothing can contain God's glory. I know sometimes people like to take God's glory and majesty and put it in a box and try and suppress it or cover it up, But do you know what happens when that takes place? God's glory, God's majesty seeps out through the very walls of whatever we try and confine it with. Nothing can contain God's glory, especially in this day and age. It's easy to think that God is being sidetracked, that God is being put on the back burner, that God is being ignored. Well, I can tell you, there is absolutely nothing can stop God's grace and majesty from being proclaimed on this earth. Even if it feels like to us that God might be losing, God hasn't. God's glory is uncontainable. Amen. Amen. Now, those are just some of the simple things that we can do to rejoice always despite our circumstances. That's how we get our mind around this idea of how do I rejoice even though there's turmoil in my life. And we remember that as we build up this habit of rejoicing always despite our circumstances, that helps God's peace to become prevalent, to surround us. And wholeness takes root inside our hearts and our minds. And that's ultimately what we want to happen. Amen. Amen. It is Monday. Remember, this Wednesday we have our collection drive. We're collecting. This is the last Wednesday we're collecting for Gigi's Playhouse. So please take advantage of that. You can go to our website, to our Facebook page to get further information of what we're collecting. It's cleaning supplies, paper goods, copy paper. Those are the things that we're collecting. So go ahead and bring those on Wednesday from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. The barrels will be outside of door C on the southwest side of our building. You can drop off your items in those barrels. This Wednesday we have prayer meeting at 7 o'clock. See you then. In the meantime, take care and look in on those who are most vulnerable.